Welcome to the Just Third Way podcast, where we ask the question, would you rather own or be owned? Brought to you by the Center for Economic and Social Justice at CESJ.org.
Hello, podcast listeners. Thanks for joining us again. Today we're going to start a series where we focus on the core values and break them down one at a time. Give a little more detail into how they came about, what they mean, and what they can provide in terms of a framework for an organization that's really helped to form and further the CESJ goals. I did want to mention also that we're recording this around September 11th. It's, I guess, the 17th anniversary of the attacks on the Twin Towers. And they have recently opened the subway station under the Twin Towers. And on the wall is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is significant because it mentions ownership of property as one of the rights. And I'm going to get some more detail on why that's important also. I've got some really special guests here today. I've got Dr. Norm Curlin. Hello, Norm.
Hello.
And I've got Dawn Brohan. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Dave.
And I've got Mike Greeny. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Dave. It's Mike Graney, by the way.
Oh, I've been pronouncing it wrong for years.
That's okay, as long as you spelled it correctly.
That's true. And if I do pronounce it wrong in the future, you'll know I'm just trying to get on your nerve. No, I'm just joking.
You already got on my nerve.
Okay.
You don't have to do anymore.
Yeah, that's not hard to do, right? So, what is that Universal Declaration of Human Rights ownership thing, Norm? I know it has significance because
Right.
It's basically talking about being able to own in association with others, correct?
Right, exactly. It's Article 17 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it's one of those rights that no country yet has been promoting in any way. So that's the reason that the Center for Economic and Social Justice was formed, to try to educate people and promote that idea that it's a fundamental human right to be an owner.
Right. And if anyone knows about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and is asking, one of the listeners about, what it means or in a conversation about it, then we can take it a step further with these core values and expand upon the whole concept and the best way to implement that particular right of ownership in association with others. And these core values, what we're going to try to do is have a podcast that discusses one or two of them at a time, and we're going to go into more detail. And I'm really honored to have Norm with us on some of these calls because he and Father Faree were the primary original authors of these core values. So do you have any words to say about how it first came together and started, Norm?
Well, yes. It starts, for me, when I first heard of Kelso's ideas back in March of 1965, and I saw that as something I was missing, and that is Kelso brought in the ideas of economic justice. He and the great books philosopher Mortimer J. Adler, in their book, by a strange title, but he was challenging Karl Marx, and it was called The Capitalist Manifesto. That was in 1958. And then you had in 1961, they talked It was called The New Capitalist, a book called, or the subtitle was, A Proposal for Freeing Economic Growth from the Slavery of Past Savings. So that was in 1961. I didn't learn of it, as I said, until while I was working with the government in the anti-poverty programs, and discovered Kelso's ideas. And immediately I could see that his ideas were totally inconsistent with the welfare state concepts, which I had previously been supporting, but then saw how difficult that would be. And so I pretty much committed my life to the Kelso ideas, and then worked with a liberal group headed by Walter Reuther, the head of the United Auto Workers, and worked with them. But I brought Kelso in, and that's another story of what happened as a result. And then Kelso and I directly worked together from 68 until about 1976. Now, Father Ferree, however, I discovered an understanding of the words social justice. And most people use that in a way that's pretty much socialist. But I think Father Ferree was acknowledged as one of the great thinkers on the subject. He wrote many books on social justice. So that's why in 1984 we formed the Center for Economic and Social Justice, and been at it now for 34 years. So
well, you really did bring those two concepts together, sort of the economic justice of Kelso's teachings with the social justice of Father Ferree's, and that is almost miraculous the way they come together and don't sort of contradict the other.
Not at all. I could.
Go ahead.
I
was going to say, I bet Mike or Dawn could expand on that for just a second, and then we'll go ahead and get into these core values.
Well, the consistency of economic and social justice is not by accident. They're both based on the same underlying principles that guide all of human life. So, of course, there's going to be a basic consistency.
And I think also Kelso's ideas of economic justice really fall under the larger umbrella of social justice, which relates to all of our institutions and all of our human activities that we do with other people. So
right.
It was a natural fit. And what was remarkable to me, as you know, Norm was mentioning that most people think of social justice as socialism, but what really clicked for me was when Ferree clarified that social justice has to do with an obligation, responsibility, and action that each of us is responsible for with regard to how we relate to our institutions and systems and laws. And so it's something that it's not a collective responsibility. It really comes down to each human being making sure that the social order is arranged in a way that every human being can develop their full human potential and dignity. And Kelso's ideas of economic justice really address the most fundamental human needs, those of security, safety, food, and shelter.
Yeah, and one other thing that both Kelso and Mortimer Adler and Ferree were very, very important. On the other hand, there were two other great leaders of the 20th century whose ideas are totally consistent and reinforce them. One is Dr. Martin Luther King, who was looking for a new synthesis beyond capitalism and socialism. He was all, and then Buckminster Fuller, one of the great design scientists of the 20th century, whose ideas also were, right. He looked at the physical side, what had to be done to create more advanced technology.
Yeah. And I wanted to add something. A lot of people think of social justice as a substitute for individual justice and individual charity. No, what social justice does is help reform our institutions, our ways of relating to each other socially, so that the individual virtues can once again function properly. See, this is what the problem with the socialists have. They think social justice is just, the individual virtues practiced on a massive scale to replace the individual virtues that aren't working.
Yeah.
No, it's not a replacement for, it's an enabler, even though that's a bad word.
Yeah, and one other thing, I was in the poverty program in 1965. I'm sorry, it was 64. You both the poverty program, anti-poverty program, and the laws prohibiting segregation were also enacted. And I had been working in Mississippi in civil rights with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and became very aware, working very closely with Medgar Evers and the leader of the NAACP, Aaron Henry, but also with SNCC and Bob Moses of SNCC. And I saw what it took to change the system. This is where social justice comes in a practical way, where you, despite the opposition, powerful opposition in the Congress, people power, organized peaceful people power may be necessary to get the new ideas across, and then the laws.
That's right. Absolutely. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was going to say, will you read those two opening paragraphs, Norm? That'll set the framework for all of the core values. I don't think we've read those on the air before.
Right. And before every one of our monthly meetings, we read this. Successful organizations start with people firmly committed to a set of core values, which cannot be compromised without weakening the organization. CESJ's strength, unity, and programs flow from our founding principles agreed upon by consensus from our first meeting on April 7th, 1984. Our core values were developed to guide us in our work, to attract others sharing these values, and to serve as the very basis of CESJ's existence. As an organization open to all people, we think that our core values, once understood, are universally appealing. We see this reflected in the broad diversity of the backgrounds of those who come together because of these shared values. The essence of our founding principles has not changed from the founding of CESJ, but as we discuss them together and with others, we will continue to refine and clarify our values by consensus. The following are CESJ's core values.
You're going to read the first two so we can discuss those, right?
Can you speak up, Dave?
How's that?
You dropped out for a second.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying that I was going to have you read the first two core values, and we'll go over that for the rest of the call.
Okay. There is an ultimate source of all creation and of all universal and absolute values, such as truth, beauty, love, and justice, which represent the highest ends of human actions. Many people call this source God. The second core value is nothing should stand between God and the human person.
Well, that pretty much sums up the very first concepts that are so important. So what that means to me is that there is a transcendent origin to what we are doing, and whether someone practices the same religion or different religion as they can look to this and say, maybe the universe or the creator had something in mind for people to get along and function together, and it's our job to sort of seek what that is. Is that how it makes you feel also, Dawn?
I think you stated it beautifully, Dave, because there's that connection between universal values. If you talk about that, you're going to also have to talk about what is universally common to all of us as human beings, and also to what connects all of us to the entire universe, creation, nature, what have you. And so we felt that in forming CESJ, we're not a religious organization, but we wanted to be open to people of every faith and people who don't consider themselves religious necessarily, but do believe that there are universal values. So, I think by acknowledging something higher than any human being or any nation or the human species, of something higher than everything that we can see, that forms the basis for the values then we're going to talk about, which we believe every human being seeks.
Yeah, and let me also say that today we talk about the rich class, the middle class, and the poor. Well, if you think about it, why not a classless society? How can we provide equal opportunity so that every human being, not only in the United States, but the United States can be the first model for the rest of the world? And I think we'll solve many, many problems to move toward the classless world society.
Right. Well, we're fortunate to have one of the premier religious writers on the call with us. And whether I pronounce his name right or not, I think you said it's Grainy.
Yes, it is.
Mike,
although I'm not sure about that premier religious writer bit there. You might get an argument about that even from me.
But I got to get used to saying your name right, Mike Grainy. Tell us what
you can pronounce it very easily. Just say Dale Carnegie 3 times there.
Yeah, really. But I wanted to ask you why these values are important to any person regardless of religious philosophy, including if they are atheist or non-religious, as Dawn put it.
Well, at the crudest level, I guess you could say that if you don't know the source of everything, or then if you don't know where you come from, how do you know where you're going? For one thing, I mean, but on a more practical level or more profound level, if there is no source of everything, how do you know that anything is real? How do you know what is right, good, or it's even true, or even if it exists? Once you start questioning that there is a source of everything, then you must be the source of everything, because you're the only thing that you know exists, unless you accept that everything around you exists.
Right.
So that's getting into pretty deep philosophical aspect of how we know what we know. But I would say also, if we are to come to some kind of agreement whereby, the possibility of eliminating war and poverty and other horrible and frankly totally unnecessary evils in the world, we've got to come to some agreement on what will be the basis upon which we can create a more just social and economic order for every human being. Not any one class, not any one nation, not any gender or whatever else. It's we really look to what is the good for every human being, and that's something which society can't tell you what's going to be good for you as an individual. That's something you're going to have to determine and pursue. But what we believe is that society, people working together and creating these things we call institutions and laws, that we can create the environment by which every human being will have the means and opportunity to pursue their fullest potential.
And there's another aspect.
Right.
There is another aspect to it, is for us to recognize that such a thing as truth and justice always will never, as human beings, being not the creator, but there is a creator where you can search for the truth. You search for what's perfect. Well, and that's what we're talking about, is how to take a system that's imperfect and consider all the theoretical alternatives and see that there's something missing, so that we have to be open-minded as human beings to learn more all of our lives, and so that we can develop to the fullest potential, not only of ourselves, but for every other person. So the system is failing to bring that about. And so what changes can take place are the principles that we look to in order to redesign the architecture of the present system.
Yeah, which brings in,
right,
to answer your first question, is why is this important to everyone, regardless of faith or philosophy or lack thereof? Well, if you don't acknowledge anything other than yourself as the measure for what is good, true, no matter how much you search for it, if all you accept is yourself, then anything goes. I mean, what was it? The Russian novelist Dostoevsky in the book that nobody reads, The Brothers Karamazov, there's a character that says, without God or whatever ultimate source you accept, all things are permissible. You can do anything you want.
Exactly, and that's why we use the word absolute values, which I know that can start a lot of arguments and philosophical debates. But the reason we use that word is that if we're to come to a common definition and something that will never be perfect, but we will have something to strive toward, take justice, for example, since that's our particular focus. We have to be thinking about something that is not going to just be defined according to what I think is the best thing for everyone else, or for society, or what you think, or what rules we can follow. We do need some things which we believe there is something out there that we're seeking. We're trying to find the perfect expression. So that relates to our concept of social justice, which is a recognition also that anything that's created by human beings is imperfect. But we can, by working together in an organized way, starting from common core values, we can improve our systems and the environment around ourselves, our social environment.
Yeah, and there's,
right.
Looking at it personally, I had the good fortune to attend one of the finest, to study law and economics at one of the finest law schools in the world. And unfortunately, they teach you the law. And remember, the lawyers are the ones who are writing the laws. They teach you the law, but they don't teach you justice. So 5 years after graduating from law school, I heard of Kelso's ideas and immediately could recognize the importance. So it is important for more and more Americans, more and more people in the world to understand principles that they can accept as being sound, and lawyers will begin and economists will begin to learn what is just in the principles that they use to structure the economy and structure such things as money.
Right. And I was going to say, while you're on that subject, it's sad that they didn't teach justice, but I bet they did talk about how our system of law and justice is based on faith to begin with, is it not? Because everything, doesn't it kind of come back to the golden rule? Do unto others as you would have done to you, and don't do unto others as you don't want done to you, right? So that's kind of a CESJ theme also.
I wish that was the truth, but the fact is that going in to study the law, they assume you know something about justice. But that assumption is incorrect, as I say, because unless you can understand principles of justice that make common sense once you hear them, you can't really expect lawyers to know what justice is. I don't think very many people understand the principles that Mortimer Adler, who used to teach the philosophy of law at the University of Chicago before he knew about Kelso.
Yeah, I mean, if you start about 200 years ago, the whole concept of justice and charity and all these things started changing. Why? Because you had the Industrial Revolution come along. Advancing technology was displacing people from the means of production, and people were baffled. What's going on? Why is this changing? And so in order to justify socialism or capitalism, people had to change their ideas of what was just, simply because you had people disconnected from what it was that made it possible to be a full member of society.
And as a result, you had economic power was concentrated either on Wall Street to promote monopoly capitalism, or it was concentrated through the government. And the government is not a person. It is a social tool. So the government became more and more powerful, and the people became increasingly dependent on the government to redistribute the income. But Kelso came up with an approach in which the people would have the economic power. Every citizen every child, every woman and man would have an equal opportunity to become an owner. But we will go into that on our website. All these things can be understood. And so we encourage the people listening to this to visit our website at www.CESJ.org, and they will begin to hear lectures. They will begin to see videos. They will have free downloadable books, the 2 Kelso books I mentioned, plus others that we've written. So there is a source. Just visit the home page for a couple minutes at www.cesj.org, and you'll get a pretty good picture of how you can quickly begin to see the basic sources of the ideas that we're now discussing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Dave, I think you made an interesting point, since, we had said this is not a religious organization, but you asked whether faith is sort of essential in order to even conceive of universals and to have something higher that you direct your actions towards. And, I think this is true. You may not define it. A Christian may define it differently than a Muslim or a Jew, but I think that notion of something higher, that what we all came from at some point, even if we never discover what that is, but having that faith, there is something that has created everything and has created a purpose for each of us, and that becomes the thing that guides a person's life, even through difficult times, and in helping to make moral judgments. So
right.
This is something you can't touch, you can't prove, you can't control, other than to guide your actions towards that more perfect thing. So I think that's a very important point that you bring, and in envisioning a better society, I think it is one in which people are contemplating this throughout their life. And it addresses the second core value, which I read, which we hadn't talked about yet. And that is the idea that nothing should stand between God or this ultimate source and the human person. And what's important here is that we're really getting down to the human being, the individual human being, but within the context of one human being interacting with other human beings. So and what we call person is not just an individual in isolation, but what makes us persons is not only our individuality, but how we interact with other human beings. And so when we say nothing should stand between God and the human person, that's where we start looking at how things like bad laws, unjust institutions create barriers. And that's part of what CESJ is identifying and using principles to say how we restructure these unjust institutions.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if we say there's a source that of perfection, of absolute values, we also, by saying that, we also recognize our own imperfection, but our duty as imperfect in our knowledge, imperfect as human beings, to strive to become more perfect. And that's where justice comes in, where truth comes in. We should strive for and be open-minded to new ideas. And if these ideas are sound, then they will eventually be understood by everyone. And this is part of how civilization progresses. But at the same time, we can think that this may be the best time in history to do it. Why? I don't think America has ever been as divided as it is today in my 88 years of
right.
life.
And we got to sign off soon, but I wanted to ask Mike real quick. Isn't that sort of the way that, I guess, logic and philosophy bring all of these things together? You've got the human person is a unique, special entity that has the need to seek virtue and seek improving their situation and coming together with others to, improve everyone's situation, society. Isn't that part of, the reason why we even need faith?
Well, yes. And I mean, this underscores the importance of the second core value there, that nothing should stand between God and the human person. And that includes prejudices and preconceptions and bad ideas that may inhibit, your reasoning process and your faith in your own reasoning power. I mean, it's like the pure materialist will say, he can't put God in a test tube or this ultimate source in a test tube and subject it to, various proofs and that sort of thing. So he'll conclude that doesn't exist. You do have to have faith in your own power of reasoning to be able to do not deductive reasoning, but what they call inductive reasoning. You remember Sherlock Holmes talked about his deductive method. What
right.
It really was inductive method. You look at the world around you and say, I have this evidence that something caused this. Now let me try and figure out what it is. And instead of saying, well, we caught the criminal because he smoked this sort of tobacco, what we do is we look at what must an ultimate source be. Well, there's not a whole lot to choose from when you talk about a sole, ultimate, perfect source. And that's how like people like St. Thomas Aquinas gave his inductive proofs of God. Well, they're not deductive proofs, so they're not scientific in that sense. They're inductive in the sense that you must have faith in your own reasoning power to trust the conclusions that you draw from them.
And
that's part of the process of reasoning. Works on your own, your own logical argument and the empirical evidence that you see. You have to be able to trust that You can't just say, I'm the only thing that exists. I don't even trust what my senses tell me or my reasoning.
And I think that what you were just saying is one of the reasons why God doesn't reveal himself to all of humanity all at once and say, hey, I am God, because then it wouldn't require faith to follow him.
Well, it would also kind of blow your mind, because if you're going to be confronted with infinite perfection and infinite goodness and infinite everything else, you'll probably go nuts.
Right. And I'm saying him from my perspective. Anyone else can replace that word with her or if they want or whatever. But anyway, we actually have to sign off here pretty soon. What were you saying, Norm?
I was the one talking over you there.
Right.
Oh, okay. Has everyone said everything they need to say? How about that?
Yeah, I just want to say that, as you pointed out in the beginning, that and Norm said we have these terrible divisions throughout the world, and if we are to survive, I think, as mankind or humankind, we're going to have to find some basis that every individual can relate to and seek their perfection, and then reform our institutions, not only locally and nationally, but also globally. And we have to go back to the basic core values upon which every human being seeks.
Yeah, and it's clear, it's common sense that Homo sapiens were not created by other Homo sapiens. New ones are, but ultimately the animal that we are, or part animal that we are, was created by another source. It took a process of creating humanity as we know humanity exists today. But we know that humanity has the ability to be creative and change the system around them. And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
Norm was giving a very good presentation of Aquinas' second argument for God's existence there. Nothing exists prior to itself.
Right. That is true. That is true. Well, that's a good way to kind of wrap it up on that philosophical thought. And I wanted to mention to everyone to please get involved. Go to the CESJ website, click on participate, and then over on the left, you can actually join. You can become a paying member for $25 per year, and that gives you a 20% discount on all the materials, because we want you to buy a lot of them and share them with your friends and family. And if you're a full-time student, that's $15. So really good deal, and a way to educate yourself and a lot of other people. We are an all-volunteer organization for the past 34 years. And we also love our sustaining and lifetime members. So there's plenty of ways to support if you want to include CESJ in your overall charitable giving scheme, and you're one of those people that is blessed enough to do so, then give us a call and we'll talk to you about that. And I guess that's about it. I'm also going to set up a voicemail for comments for you guys to call in and verbally tell us something about what you think maybe, or about something we said. And then I'm going to actually play those recordings on the podcast. So if you want to do that, I will have a voicemail set up to do that real soon. And I guess that's it. Does anyone else have one other little thing?
Well, I just want to thank you for your effort in bringing this about, our opportunity to talk in a way in which people can record or listen and suggest that their friends and family listen. So, Dave, you have really done you made a great contribution to the Just Third Way.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anything?
No, we're fine, Dave. We really appreciate this opportunity and everything you're doing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll talk again soon, and we'll start to hit the next core values soon. We might have another show before we go back to the core values, but eventually we'll go back through them all. And thanks again, everyone, and own or be owned.